Welcome to Marketing Brew Weekly, where we dissect the trends and strategies that are surprising and delighting, and for today's edition, enraging the marketing industry. I'm Jenny Mywin, reporter at Marketing Brew.
I'm Kelsey Sutton, editor.
And I'm Katie Hicks, senior reporter.
We are taking a look at Ragebait, intentional or not. Is it ever worth it as a strategy? Let's find out.
So I have some news that may just piss you off. The word of the year, according to the Oxford University Press, is Ragebait. They define it as content designed to elicit anger by being frustrating, offensive, or deliberately divisive in nature, and a mainstream term referenced in newsrooms across the world and discourse among content creators. What do you guys think of this?
Here's the thing. I know I'm literally falling for Ragebait as I react to this, but first of all, word of the year should not be 2 words. Pedantic, but I stand by it. Second of all, I think having the word of the year be a concept that is so internet based is also enraging to me, but unfortunately, Ragebait was really, really relevant this year, both just for anyone online and of course for marketers. So
yeah, I mean, we've seen content creators engage in Ragebait, and now we're seeing more and more brands do this. It's a way to increase engagement. All press is good press, but for the internet era, I mean, but what we really have to look at is to what extent can brands engage in rage baiting, and what are the risks, and what happens when your brand is accused of rage baiting, but you didn't intend for it to be. But before we get into that, I have one question to ask. If you guys could automate one thing in your life, what would it be?
Easy, making my bed every morning.
Oh my gosh, it would make the morning so much better.
Annoying. Yeah.
Well, that's a good answer, but an even better answer for marketers is automating busy work away with ActiveCampaign. Their autonomous marketing platform helps out the tedious parts for you, like building out your email and SMS campaigns, optimizing them based on billions of data points, and summing up the results with clear next steps, not endless reports.
That way you can spend more time on strategy and less time on marketing admin. ActiveCampaign's specialized AI agents can extend your team and handle all that operational work so you can get your message out there in minutes, not weeks.
Plus, align your message across every channel instead of losing things through the endless game of office telephone. Take all that work off your back when you go to activecampaign.com. That's activecampaign.com. Okay, so Ragebait was kind of everywhere this year, so I kind of want to just do a little exercise, go around the room real quick. When I say Ragebait, what campaigns do you guys think of?
We have to start with Sydney Sweeney.
I was going to say the exact same thing, Katie. I think that is the campaign of the year. Obviously, Sydney Sweeney's Has Great Jeans campaign has gotten a lot of attention and a lot of backlash. That happened over the summer, and I feel like that defined the denim discourse for quite a long time. But I don't think that's the only one I can think of. E.l.f., the makeup and skincare brand, put out a campaign with Matt Rife, who's a comedian who had previously joked about domestic violence on a Netflix special. So that made people very upset that he was kind of involved in this campaign.
I mean, we talked about the Friend AI campaign, all over the subway a few weeks ago, and how people were graffitiing that because they were upset about how it's saying basically AI can be your new friend. You don't need real relationships. That's one that comes to mind. Also, Skims making the merkin.
Yes.
Just ridiculous off the bat.
Yeah.
Ragebait as product, I feel was something that we talked about or saw a lot this year. They also had the face contour. It was like a bandage that you wear.
It was supposed to reduce your chin fat.
Make you snatch.
Yeah.
Which maybe some people love, but obviously incited a lot of people being oh, why would you make this type of product? Because it says a certain thing about beauty standards and society, and it makes people mad right away. The other thing that of course make people mad, you mentioned AI with Friend, Katie, but I think of the Coca-Cola AI ads. I feel the first one came out last year and people were already mad about it, and then they had the second one this year, used AI again, and they were yeah, we're using AI. What about it? They really committed to it, even though people were mad, which feels rather rage baity to me.
I think the official quote from Coca-Cola's global VP and head of generative AI was "Cry about it if you don't like it." He said that at an Ad Week event last month. So yeah, they're not responding to the backlash by apologizing by any means.
Yeah. Also, I think that Ragebait as kind of a brand tactic is we're also have seen this in the creator world for a really long time. This is not the first year that we've seen it. I feel like even clickbait is sort of like a precursor to rage bait.
Yeah.
But we've seen, I mean, a video of somebody just lying or making something up to make people, to gin up controversy.
Because it gets engagement, right? Because that's what it's ultimately all about. Because that's what I do want to talk about here is like we've seen so much rage bait this year, but why? Why would brands even participate in rage bait in the first place?
Yeah, I think you're so right. Engagement and virality are the name of the game. We hear this all the time. Marketers are wondering, how do I break through? How do I break through? And a really easy way of breaking through is to make people mad, because then it kind of kicks off a whole dialogue, right?
You can't help but talk about it.
There are reaction videos. There are articles written about what was this, what was this about? What does this really say about us? Da, da, da. And it can just kind of spiral into this, weeks long, months long, even conversation.
And that's the thing too, is if you have a lively comment section, like it can keep the video alive and like on people's feeds for longer. You could see a video that people were angry about like 2 months ago that appears on your feed because people are still arguing in the comments.
Yeah. But I think something that's really interesting here, and like, okay, all press is good press. That's a idiom for a reason, right? People say that for a reason, but I don't think it always is. And I think one of the things that is also really interesting is we don't really see any brands or creators in many cases owning up to being rage baity. Like there's not, I can't think of an example of a brand who's like, you're right, we just were doing that.
Gotcha.
Tee-hee. Like
we purposely were trying to make you mad. It's like you can't admit to that if you want the rage bait to work.
I mean, like American Eagle, like they keep doubling down and saying like it was always about the jeans. The campaign was always about the jeans, not about GENES, but about denim. Like they will not admit that this campaign was maybe designed to get people talking.
Yeah, because you talked to the CMO, right, Katie? And
Right.
he directly addressed that and was like, that wasn't the point.
And they say the campaign was worth every dollar. Like they stand by it, and they do not admit that there was controversy there.
I feel like that's a key part of rage baity campaigns, whether it's intentional or not, is that you can't admit that it's rage baity, and you kind of have to stand by whatever it is that you put out there. And it's interesting to see how brands like toe that line, because like it depends on like how bad the infraction is, right? Like Sydney Sweeney, they really stood by that, even though like the criticisms there were like ones of accusing them of eugenicist language, which feels pretty serious. But then I think about on the flip side, one of the examples you brought up, Kelsey, was Matt Rife's campaign with E.l.f. They did address that one. And because he was like a canceled figure and like was kind of in hot water for a rather controversial issue, they kind of acknowledged that like, oh, like that was something that like we should have thought about, but they also didn't apologize, which I feel like is still like really key to like how you engage in the rage bait.
I think one of their executives basically said, we don't look in the rearview mirror, we're moving on from this. We didn't do our homework, but we're moving on. We're putting this, behind us. But I think, that the fact that we're talking about all these brands come to mind as examples of rage bait, and yet there's no definitive proof that any of these brands did something on purpose, or if they sort of fell into it, controversy sort of by accident. I think that leads me to a point I really want to talk about, which is what happens when your brand, when you put out a campaign and you're like, this is perfect, and then it goes out and it gets a huge amount of backlash, and then somebody says, this was rage bait all along, this was trying to, this was trying to make people mad, because I think that can bring with it a lot of negative sentiment. And so it's sort of like, what happens when your brand is accused of rage baiting when that was not actually the point? Have we seen any examples of that? What is a brand to do?
I think the Cracker Barrel example comes to mind when they did their rebrand earlier this year. I think it was over the summer, and immediately, you had right-wing backlash, people saying that you're kind of alienating your audience, you're changing what Cracker Barrel actually is. People are really angry, and I think an important aspect of this conversation is the fact that the internet now is so riddled with bot activity that you could put out something as innocuous as a rebrand, and it could get picked up by like one person saying something negative, and then a bot network taking that and exacerbating it. And that's kind of what happened with Cracker Barrel. We talked to some experts. Peak Metrics is the data analytics center that had tracked some of this bot activity with Cracker Barrel, and they've seen it with some other brands too, where one negative post is all it takes for a bot network to like pick up on that, use generative AI, replicate it, and put it all over the internet. So all of a sudden it looks like you've got this like rage-induced customer base, but it might just be bots.
And that's such a good thought, because it's not just if you see a bot being mad, a regular consumer might not necessarily know that. Yeah. And they might go, oh my gosh, that's a good point. Now I'm mad. Mm-hmm. And so there's this sort of halo effect of people going, wait, isn't there a controversy around that? Isn't this sort of a bad thing? Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a real risk for a lot of brands. Something I think is really interesting is just sort of like, one of the most important things is, I think, having a lot of people with different perspectives kind of evaluating any sort of brand campaign mm-hmm. at the outset and going, okay, what interpretations of this have we maybe not considered? Let's try to look at it from all different angles. What sort of bad faith reading could somebody possibly bring? Because that's also part of it, is there's the bot activity, and then there's also people who benefit from being part of sort of the culture wars or the cultural conversation. So might be going into something looking for controversy, looking to develop and create sort of a narrative of controversy. Mm-hmm. So we sort of have maybe an audience, a consumer base that's primed to be mad, to be part of these conversations. Then there are people who benefit and they drive their own sort of personal brand engagement by, build their own personal brands as being sort of truth tellers or just kind of people who are driving this super like polarization. So how are they maybe going to read it? And then going, okay, and are we okay with that? If this is to happen, if somebody's going to run with it, are we good with that? Are we ready to explain ourselves? And I think that's sort of the interesting thing I think about with American Eagle is they did really say, no, this was not our intention, and we're not going to give it more attention than maybe we want to. We're not going to validate it. Yep. Right. We're not going to validate it. We're not going to say like, this is what it was always about. This is what it was always about. And they kind of stood that line versus, Cracker Barrel. And again, these are not totally one-to-one. And I want to just state that for the record, but like they were, it seemed like they were caught sort of off guard, did not really expect that this was going to happen. And again, it can be kind of hard to tell, but they rolled it back. That could be millions of dollars of effort and, wasted essentially to roll back something that there had been in the works for months and months. Mm-hmm. Having to make that change can be really costly, if nothing else.
Yeah. I feel like that's such a real thing, is that like, most brands will choose to stand the line and to kind of be clear on what their intention was and let the dust kind of settle before maybe reinforcing that like this is what they meant to do all along. But it's so crazy, and I just put myself like in the marketer's shoes sometimes of thinking of like, oh, like you put all this work into this campaign and then it gets out there and it really gets people mad, and instead of like being able to explain yourself right away, you kind of have to like let it sit and let people like have their opinions about it and then like stay strong on whatever it is your original intention was, which is kind of just like a major exercise in patience. I feel like in a crisis, like you want to explain yourself like on a human level, but like from a marketing perspective, it doesn't look great to just like immediately jump to explaining yourself or jump to apologies, because it makes it look like you didn't think about those things in the first place, which, going back to what you said, Kelsey, it's like so important to have someone in the room that can do that bad faith reading, that can think about like all of the audiences that you might not be typically trying to reach, but it might get to and might read it in a certain type of way. And that is like it's something you have to have from the beginning, and it's something that like feels like should be a given. Like think of everyone who's seeing this, think of all the different types of audiences, but it's not always in the cards and in the plan.
And isn't that so much harder when you have to move so fast, right? Like how do you
Totally.
bring in a bunch of stakeholders to kind of evaluate something from 45 different angles when you're trying to put something out in, a week?
But I do think that is why some of these campaigns that we've brought up incited the rage bait like accusation, is because people also have an understanding of marketing at a base level that like campaigns take time, especially a campaign like Sydney Sweeney that is a big star that had like probably months and months of planning. Even something like Matt Rife, who is probably not as big of a star as Sydney Sweeney, but is a known name. Like anytime you have big celebrities involved, it's like people like subconsciously know that you spent a lot of time getting those people together, getting the schedules right, getting the production together, getting the script written, getting that approved by their people and your people. Like there's so many steps to that, and it is crazy to the consumer when they think about that and they're like, and no one caught the double meaning of jeans. No one caught what Matt Rife's perception is amongst Gen Z audiences right now. And that then becomes like a perception of failure on the brand, which is what makes people mad on top of whatever the original sin was.
Yeah, I mean, I think even with the American Eagle example too, like the campaign calls back to a controversial Brooke Shields Calvin Klein campaign from the 90s. So even just going off that source material, I think somebody must have known that this was going to cause conversation. Maybe they didn't expect the extent and like where the conversation ended up. But I feel like you do something like that. You call back to something that already kind of went through the ringer in the media in order to do that again. But I think what we were talking about before with like getting human insights is so important on the front end. And that's one of the things when I was talking about like the bot activity with peak metrics is like, what do we do with like social listening now? Like, how do you know if like a campaign is resonating truly with customers and it's not just like, you're not getting lost in the clutter of like bot activity? And basically their response was, we're going to have to see more focus groups. We're going to go back to like what marketing kind of
Old school
tactics where you're asking people directly and ideally a large swath of people from diverse backgrounds what they think of something and getting like one-to-one conversations, because social listening is only going to get harder the more cluttered social media becomes.
It's so interesting because I feel like this is so cliche, but like the explosion of the internet made like marketing so much more like wide reaching, like being able to put everything on social. But now we're seeing like kind of the like negative effects of that is that you don't know what's real and what's not. And it's just like the conversation with AI, right? Where it's like, okay, is this content real? Is it not? And there's so much doubt, I feel like, starting to form on the consumer side of like, am I seeing real content and real things that I want to engage with? And now it's showing up on the marketer side too of like, okay, is this feedback real? Is this, and it's not even, I feel like the conversation used to be like, is this review paid for? And now it's like, it might have just come from a robot, which is like truly not useful feedback.
And a bot is not making a decision about what jeans to buy because it's not
Doesn't
real.
wear jeans.
But it could influence a real consumer's decision about, what to do. I want to bring something up though, which is I kind of think that consumers have such short memories. They're just inundated with messages all the time. Like, are people, and maybe the Sydney Sweeney thing is like the wrong example here since that kind of dominated cultural conversation for quite a while. But in a couple of years, are people going to remember e.l.f.'s misstep with, I don't know. Are they just going to remember, oh yeah, I've heard a lot about e.l.f. I don't really remember why. And I feel like that's kind of a cynical take here, but I do think that that's part of the reality of being a marketer now. It's sort of cutting through the noise. It's because it is really noisy, and because it's so noisy, consumers are sort of have selective memories a little bit. They might remember the brand and they might go, I think they were in the news, but I don't really remember what for. Of course, then there's the other risk of theirs going, I remember they were in the news only because of that bad thing.
Yeah.
And that's the only thing they remember about the brand.
I mean, that is the risk that brands run, right? And it's like, that's the theory behind if a brand is intentionally doing rage bait, they're thinking about that and they're weighing the pros and cons of, okay, this is going to get bad press for a little bit, but like eventually people will forget about it. But in the time that it's top of mind, people will be talking about us, and like perhaps that'll halo effect its way into you thinking about us 2 months from now, but you're like, oh, I don't remember why I was thinking about e.l.f., but now that I'm thinking about e.l.f., maybe I should go buy that eyebrow product that I kind of need to replace. Like, maybe you don't think about what the bad thing was, the thing that got you mad in the first place, but you're thinking about the brand, and that's worth it. But again, no one's admitting to doing that just from the jump with intention.
I think it raises a good question though, which is like, does Ragebait work? And like, to your point, like if it increases recall, maybe that's what the marketers wanted. Maybe it's memory at all costs. As long as you remember our brand and you buy it because you remembered something about it, like maybe that's enough. And like, to American Eagle's credit, I guess, like they found that this campaign with Sydney Sweeney boosted sales, and they, again, stand by it. So I think my question is, what kind of precedent does this set? Do you think more brands are going to start doing these like plausibly deniable campaigns where they can say, no, we didn't mean to do this thing, but like they're inherently trying to get people talking?
I think that, again, this campaign is just so rife for discussion, but I think that one is an interesting example to dig into because I wonder, it makes me think about what American Eagle's brand perception was before the Sydney Sweeney campaign. I knew what American Eagle was. I grew up with like that brand in my mall, but like I didn't think about it all that often. And obviously people think about it a lot this year because of this campaign. And does it kind of set the precedent of, if you're a brand that maybe people know, but like don't think about all the time, is your way to get like back onto the cultural scene to do something splashy like this, to do something that might be a little bit maddening? Is it worth it? I don't know. Like, I am a risk-averse person, so I think if I was in that position, I would say no, but you can't deny the results. Like you said, Katie, it literally, it made money. They spent the most money they've ever spent on that campaign, but it was worth it in the end. And it's like, if you're a business person, you're looking at the end results, it's hard to deny that's what happened with this campaign.
I do think, though, that one of the things that always happens with every marketing trend or cycle is that it reaches a point of too much saturation. And then people are like, oh my gosh, here a brand comes again, trying to trick us, trying to bait and switch us into being mad about this thing. And I do think that that's the kind of increased risk here is if brands are continuing to say, I'm willing to, partner with this controversial figure because that might rile up some attention, but we think it's worth it. It might just reach a point where people are sort of saying, I'm tired of this. Don't stop doing this to me. Like, we've all moved on to something else. And so it's sort of like a shortcut to virality, but I think you always run the risk of being the last adopter, at which point it's almost
then
like
you're lame.
Yeah. And I was going to say, I feel like being controversial is bad. And again, some of these are like, I'm like, that there's some serious allegations here of what the rage is. But I feel like beyond being controversial, being a lame brand is like, you're not going to win anybody over. People are like, okay, we've been there, done that. So I do kind of wonder how long this lasts.
Yeah.
I kind of think about this as this was years ago, but when we started talking about brands acting extremely casual on social and being like,
people are over that now.
The unhinged marketing trend.
Yeah, exactly. So that we've seen sort of these tactics, and it's just, they're always sort of blips. It's kind of like you got to do it now or move right on. At the same time, though, I think about Skims as an example. Kim Kardashian and the Kardashian family have been courting controversy their entire careers.
And it's worked.
And they keep it fresh every time.
It's a fresh controversy.
It's worked time and time again. So I think that there's sort of some staying power there too, particularly when you don't really say anything about it. You put something out that's crazy and gets people talking and gets people riled up, and then there's sort of no comment.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of...
It's mysterious.
It's out there, it's mysterious, and then it happens again. And so I do think that there is some staying power there, which is...
They just can't be too controversial. I fear that like brands will try to one up each other and get more and more controversial in order to break through. I just feel like the more angry people get by being on social media, especially now that algorithms are feeding more and more ads to people. I mean, if people open up TikTok or Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts or whatever, and they're scrolling, they're seeing mostly content geared to make them angry, followed by AI slop or whatever else kind of content that they're consuming. It's like, at what point do people just sign off?
Right.
Close their
touch grass.
and go for a walk.
But I think it'd be remiss of us to not say that like it's not that we're recommending or thinking that just being like prim and perfect and like just like essentially boring is going to work either, right? Like there's a reason why people court controversy and they do slightly like interesting things, for lack of a better word, is because it cuts through the noise. It makes you talk about something. And like if you want to be a part of culture, which every brand I've ever talked to wants to be a part of culture, you have to do something that incites conversation and makes people think and makes people like kind of look at you and be like, oh, that's cool, or that's interesting, and that doesn't come with being safe and just doing the nice, pretty, sparkly thing all the time.
I'm curious, is there a brand that comes to mind that you feel like has executed like Ragebait or Ragebait-esque strategies effectively?
I think I can think of one, which was, I think it was earlier this year, maybe in March, but The Ordinary, which is a skincare brand, kind of known for very affordable prices, put out, they sold eggs in some of their stores, and they were priced at like $3.37.
And that was so cheap at the time.
Eggs were like $12 a carton.
It was right in the moment when eggs were extremely expensive. And I thought something that was really interesting about this is I don't think that was without risk. And the reason I say that is because people struggling economically is like a real issue. And like people were very concerned about the price of lots and lots of things and in that moment, and frankly still are. But I think the thing that made it interesting to me was it sort of positioned The Ordinary as being kind of on the consumer's side. Like, we get it.
We're mad with you.
We're
about
mad
the price
with
of
you.
eggs.
Yes. We're kind of experiencing the same rage that you're experiencing.
We're all mad.
We're mad against the system, not
Yes.
against like you as the consumer.
And then it also immediately pivots into their kind of core brand message, which is accessibility and affordability for skincare products. So I think I saw somebody call it gentle outrage, and I thought that was such a funny thing because it was sort of, you see it and you're like, oh my gosh, you're right, eggs are so expensive, and then it kind of pivots into something a lot more positive. And I thought I
But
really
I'm getting
liked,
a great deal.
yeah, I thought that was a really interesting and more kind of unifying choice.
Yeah.
Again, I think weighing in on anything that has political or economic overtones has an element of risk, but it's not making the consumer mad and then being like, ha, you're mad. Like it's not antagonistic.
It's not poking fun at the consumer either.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more, sort of saying we get it.
We are on your side. We get you. We are the same as you. Big brand and little person, all the same at the end of the day.
Right. Which again, if you think about it for 1 second, you're like, hang on. But it does. I that stood out to me, and I
feels
remember
good.
thinking I thought that was a pretty genius kind of choice that they made.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. And if you have an example of something that made your blood boil, but then you were like, maybe that actually worked on me, send us an email at mkbw@morningbrew.com, which you can also find in the show notes. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.